Tonight, KARE 11 investigates a major disconnect at the VA.
Veterans are calling the VA, but getting transferred to a disconnected phone line. Here's KARE 11 investigative reporter AJ Legault.
That's the way we're treated.
He answered his nation's call.
Yeah.
So pardon his irritation.
Very frustrating.
Over his nation not answering his. You're listening to a recording Bob Morris of Avon, Minnesota made, as he called what's supposed to be an official VA line.
To connect to Laurel Locksmith,
Trying to connect
press 1.
with the VA's Board of Veterans Appeals in D.C.
4. VCA University Veterinary Clinic.
You heard right. A veteran offered the number to a veterinarian. Great if he had a dog.
Here is my medication drawer.
What he has
I don't have to eat breakfast after taking all those pills.
is heart disease, high blood
Metformin.
pressure, diabetes, and bladder cancer.
And at that time, the doctor that found it, the first thing he said to me, he says, "Were you ever exposed to Agent Orange?"
To answer that, you have to flip back the pages of time.
There's the kid.
A kid sent to Korea.
Did that tour of duty over there at that time, 70 and 71.
Agent Orange, the toxic herbicide the U.S. military used to remove jungle foliage in Vietnam, was also used in Korea along the de facto border between the North and South, known as the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. The VA's website says veterans who served in Korea near the DMZ between 1968 and 1971 are presumed to have been exposed. But Bob has not received that presumed disability compensation.
Nothing but denials.
Denied. The VA says there's no proof he was at the DMZ. His main duty station was Kunsan Air Base, far to the south. But Bob says he spent weeks at the DMZ.
If you were in the 6175th Police Squadron, it was mandatory that you went to the DMZ for your combat and weapons training. Digging into the dirt where the Agent Orange was being sprayed.
The government lost his military records in a fire, but Bob says he has proof. He'd mailed from Korea to his parents in St. Cloud a recording.
I was at combat preparedness school.
Telling his folks about his time at the DMZ.
I fired all these things were at the DMZ.
I was on the DMZ. There I am at 20 years old.
Refusing to take the VA's denials and go away quietly, Bob continues to appeal.
Yeah, I never would have asked for it, but they tell you got it coming.
In January of 2016, he requested, as is his right, a live video hearing with the Board of Veterans Appeals, known as the BVA. A year passed with no response.
Yeah.
So he called the Department of Veterans Affairs, recording the conversation.
And the Board of Veterans Appeals are the ones that would set that up for you.
Just listen as the VA tries to connect him.
Sir, thank you for your service to our country. I'm going to transfer you to the 202 number. That's 202-565-5436. That's the Board of Veterans Appeals. One moment, please.
Instead of directing him to the BVA, he gets a recording saying the number is no longer in service and offering to connect him to private businesses.
To connect to Laurel Locksmith.
I couldn't believe it,
He dialed back, same result.
Call a plumber or some damn thing.
His next call, KARE 11. We watched as he dialed the number he'd been given, the exact same number from the VA's official forms.
Press 2.
The same thing happened.
4. 24/7 Locksmith Services.
Well, there I got my help again.
Bob and KARE 11 tried calling the so-called customer service line, an 800 number listed on the BVA's website.
The phone's ringing and phone's ringing.
And ringing, and ringing, and ringing. No voicemail, no please hold for operator. Eventually, it just disconnects.
I'm getting used to it. That's the way they treat us.
A veteran who just wants a date for an appeal hearing and his government to show the same dedication to him he showed during his time at the DMZ.
I'm sure I am not the only veteran out there with these problems.
Well, Bob's right. He's certainly not alone. As of March 1st, nearly 470,000 veterans have appeals pending, and the Board of Veterans Appeals has basically a 5-year backlog. Now, one interesting note, Bob actually had another heart surgery at the Minneapolis VA today. He's watching his story tonight from a VA hospital bed.
So
hope he did
frustrating.
well. Yeah.
So what are these guys supposed to do if they can't get through on the phone to?
Yeah,
I mean, what do they do?
There's the million-dollar question. We asked the VA this morning in D.C. We said, hey, what's going on here? No response tonight.
No response.
No. We are hearing, though, already from members of Congress, and
would
we're going to
hope
have more
so.
on this story tomorrow as we continue to push for answers.
Good evening. Congress now pressing the VA for answers after a KARE 11 investigation exposed a big problem.
Veterans searching for benefit information are having their calls for help go unanswered. Investigative reporter AJ Legault has spent the past 3 years looking into problems at the VA. So what have you learned since last night?
Well, Minnesota Congressman Tim Walz told me today that his fourth grader knows how to set up a voicemail on their cell phone. So he and other lawmakers were astonished when they saw our report about the VA's disconnect. Calls from veterans not even being answered.
This is absolutely outrageous.
Blistering criticism of the Department of Veterans Affairs after KARE 11 showed this. A Minnesota veteran calling a VA 800 number.
The phone's ringing and phone's ringing.
We called too. The phone rings for more than 3 minutes. No voicemail, no hold for operator. Eventually, it just disconnects. And when he tries the regular number listed in VA paperwork, he gets a recording saying the number is no longer in service and offering to connect him to private businesses.
To connect to Laurel Locksmith.
I couldn't believe it, you know.
You think about our veterans, again, serving our country on the front line, and they can't even get the phone lines right.
We're going to find out what the reason is. We're going to find out why you at least have an answering machine.
Representative Tim Walz says the VA told him the disconnected number had been listed by mistake, but the 800 number should work. So he tried himself.
When I called it again this morning, it rang 10 times and then cut off.
Here is my medication drawer.
Air Force veteran Bob Morris was calling, trying to get a date for his appeal for VA benefits. But with a backlog of more than 400,000 appeals, Walz says the VA told him the phones get overloaded.
That might be the reason, but that is certainly not the answer. The answer is figure out how you get it so someone picks up the phone.
Well, Representative Walz says fixing the phone situation is just the first step. He's calling for quick action on a bipartisan bill he helped sponsor to streamline the entire appeals process so veterans like Bob don't have to wait years just to get a hearing. And we should point out that the VA has yet to respond to our questions about their broken phones.
Yeah.
Have they yet to respond to Mr. Walz?
They responded to Congressman Walz. They
Yeah.
responded to Senator Klobuchar as well. We've asked him a number of questions and radio silence so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
Minnesota lawmakers are calling on Congress to help veterans by cutting the massive backlog of benefit claims. This comes in the wake of a KARE 11 investigation into delays and disconnects at the VA. Investigative reporter AJ Legault has the latest developments.
I can tell you this, the appeal process is broken. That is creating an untenable backlog.
Representative Tim Walz is calling for immediate action in Congress on legislation to help veterans like Bob Morris.
I've been at this since 2005.
This week, we told you how the Avon, Minnesota man had been waiting for more than a decade, trying to get benefits for serious health problems he thinks were caused by exposure to Agent Orange in Korea.
Who would even think it would be a delay like this?
To add insult to injury, when he called the VA about a hearing date, he got one number that was disconnected and another that rang repeatedly without being answered. Walz says it's a symptom of a bigger problem.
The problem is, if Bob's appeal would have been heard in a timely manner, he wouldn't be needing to make this call.
So Walz, Senator Al Franken, and a Republican from California have introduced a bipartisan bill they say will cut VA red tape, allowing private local doctors to do disability exams and speeding the appeal process if there's a denial. As of March 1st, VA records show there was a backlog of 469,000 appeals.
I still have to believe President Trump when he said veterans were going to be a priority. Bring us the appeals bill, get this thing fixed.
Well, Congressman Walz also sent a copy of this letter to the new Secretary of the VA, Dr. David Shulkin, citing KARE 11's investigation and urging him to take action to fix the disconnected and not working phone system
quote, immediately. And Julia, we should note that we're now day 3 into this story, and we've yet to hear from the VA to answer our questions about why the phone system wasn't working to begin with.
Well, it must be discouraging when you're waiting in that line and you hear about 500,000 people are also waiting to hear back from the VA.
5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. Some folks are waiting, and the veteran we've profiled first started trying to get Agent Orange benefits in 2005.
All right. Well, let's hope this makes a difference. Thank you, AJ. Well, action taken tonight in response to a KARE 11 investigation. The Department of Veterans Affairs is making major changes in how they respond to veterans' phone calls, promising to shut down an antiquated call center. Investigative reporter AJ Legault, who broke this story, is here to tell us how that happened. And great work on this, by the way, AJ.
Thank you, Julie. What our investigation revealed was a big disconnect. Veterans being routed to deactivated or never answered phone lines. We're now happy to report that is about to change.
Everyone has a story.
Yeah.
Up until now, Bob Morris's was one of denials, defeats, and delays.
Very frustrating.
From frustration to vindication.
Bob Morris has done a service for all veterans across the country.
Earlier this week, we told you how the Avon, Minnesota veteran had been waiting for more than a decade, trying to get benefits for serious health problems he thinks were caused by exposure to Agent Orange in Korea.
Here is my medication drawer.
To add insult to injury, when he called the VA about a hearing date, he got one number that was disconnected and offered him private veterinarian services.
For VCA University Veterinary Clinic.
And another
The phone's ringing and phone's ringing.
that rang repeatedly without being answered. Congress took immediate notice.
I don't think this would have happened if you hadn't worked with Bob and brought this to the Veterans Affairs attention, because this was just an outrage, and we got right on it and got.
Senator Klobuchar tells us the Department of Veterans Affairs is now going to shut down the antiquated call center for benefits claims that Bob was routed to. 90,000 calls a year were going into it, but it could only handle 5 calls at a time. Everyone else, like Bob, just got disconnected without warning.
It's just ridiculous, and so they are changing that and getting rid of that.
Starting in May, all benefits appeals calls like Bob's will be routed through the modernized National Call Center, where wait times on the line average less than 2 minutes.
They are not just fixing this for Bob, they have pledged to fix it for all people in his position.
The senator also said the VA has promised to expedite Bob's appeals hearing so he can finally find out just what is going on with his benefits claim.
Good evening. We begin tonight with congressional action sparked by a KARE 11 investigation. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill to modernize the appeals process for VA disability claims.
The bill was introduced just days after our investigative team shared the story of a Minnesota veteran's struggle just to get someone to answer his phone calls. Investigative reporter AJ.
Julie, Randy, back in March, we worked with a Minnesota man to expose how veterans searching for information about their benefits claims were being routed to phone lines that were either disconnected or never even answered. Well, Congress demanded action, and that Minnesota veteran's story continues to spark VA reform.
I hope you can make people aware of this.
That was veteran Bob Morris's request back in March when he shared his story about waiting more than a decade trying to get benefits for serious health problems he thinks were caused by exposure to Agent Orange in Korea.
Who would even think it would be a delay like this?
To add insult to injury, when he called the VA about a hearing date, he got one number that was disconnected and another that rang repeatedly without being answered. The very next day, Congressman Tim Walz responded, calling it a symptom of a bigger problem.
The problem is, if Bob's appeal would have been heard in a timely manner, he wouldn't be needing to make this call.
Walz, Senator Al Franken, and a Republican from California introduced a bipartisan bill to cut VA red tape, allowing private local doctors to do disability exams and speeding the appeal process if there's a denial. This affects a lot of veterans. VA records show there's a backlog of 469,000 appeals.
I can tell you this, the appeal process is broken. That is creating an untenable backlog.
The Quicker Veterans Benefits Delivery Act of 2017 passed with broad bipartisan support in the House. The Senate still has to take it up, and as for Bob, the Minnesota vet who wanted to make people aware, I think it's safe to say he got his wish. This week, Air Force veteran Bob Morris trudged through the Minnesota cold towards an appointment years in the making.
15 years.
He's at the Whipple Federal Building for a VA benefits appeals hearing. To get here has been a fight.
It's terrible. If it wasn't for the help of you guys, I probably never would be here yet.
Bob's battle to get this hearing was the subject of a KARE 11 investigation last spring that exposed a major disconnect at the VA.
I hope you can make people aware of this.
That was Bob's request in March when he shared his story about waiting more than a decade trying to get benefits for serious health problems
Here is my medication drawer.
he thinks were caused by exposure to Agent Orange. When he tried calling about a hearing date, he got one number that was disconnected
To connect to Laurel Locksmith.
and another that rang repeatedly without being answered.
I couldn't believe it, you know.
Congressman Tim Walz called it a symptom of a bigger problem.
The problem is, if Bob's appeal would have been heard in a timely manner, he wouldn't be needing to make this call.
Walz, Senator Al Franken, and a Republican congressman from California introduced a bipartisan bill to cut VA red tape, allow private local doctors to do disability exams, and speed the appeal process if there's a denial. This affects a lot of veterans. VA records showed a backlog of roughly 469,000 appeals. The bill passed in the House and is pending in the Senate, where Al Franken is listed as the only sponsor. But with today's announcement,
I will be resigning.
It raises the question, what happens to this and other important legislation Senator Franken was working on? Congressional sources tell KARE 11 it's possible, but highly unlikely any of Franken's bills would be passed after he leaves. They'll likely need to be reintroduced by another senator. But in the case of the bill to help veterans like Bob, the Senate can simply vote to pass the House version. As for Bob, who finally got his hearing, he now goes back to waiting for a ruling.
I'm saying an extra prayer today and hoping for the best.
AJ Legault, KARE 11 News.